Jimmy Kimmel gave an impassioned defense of free speech last night when he returned to the airwaves for the first time after ABC preempted his show. Now, during his opening monologue, he needled at FCC Chairman Brendan Carr and included these remarks that President Trump made in 2022 about free speech.
If we don't have free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that. If this most fundamental right is allowed to perish, then the rest of our rights and liberties will topple, just like dominoes, one by one. They'll go down.
And a live look at the White House now, where the Kimmel controversy is stirring up a debate over the state of free speech in America and whether the Trump administration has shifted its tone on free speech protections. On Inauguration Day earlier this year, Trump promised to protect free speech.
And I'll also sign an executive order to immediately end federal government censorship of the American people. In America, we believe in free speech.
Now, almost 9 months later, we heard President Trump say this about Jimmy Kimmel when ABC first decided to preempt his show.
Jimmy Kimmel is not a talented person. He had very bad ratings, and they should have fired him a long time ago. So, you can call that free speech or not. He was fired for lack of talent.
I want to bring in Chief Washington Analyst Robert Costa. Robert, great to be with you. We know President Trump has talked about free speech in the past, but have we seen a shift?
We've seen President Trump talk a lot about free speech on college campuses. We've talked a lot about we've seen him talk a lot about his criticism of how the Democrats have handled speech issues. But you're seeing right now a real debate about speech in this country with the specter of political violence hovering over all of it. Members of both parties, including President Trump on the Republican side, are looking at what's the scope of speech. And this all comes down to the First Amendment, which outlines our constitutional right to have free speech in this country. But because of the politically charged moment, free speech is definitely being debated to an extent. Most constitutional scholars says there's only so much the government can do to restrict free speech, if anything. Of course, the government can't be blessing violence or outright threats. But in terms of articulating a view on different issues, a lot is allowed, and this is part of the give and take of politics.
You know, some Republican senators have been speaking out against FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, who suggested that Jimmy Kimmel should be suspended from his show and ABC. Now, during a podcast recording, Texas Senator Ted Cruz said the move sets a dangerous precedent. Here's what he had to say.
If the government gets in the business of saying, we don't like what you, the media, have said, we're going to ban you from the airwaves if you don't say what we like, that will end up bad for conservatives.
And Senator Cruz didn't stop there. He compared the FCC chairman's words to something out of a gangster movie. And Carr himself also got some backlash from Republican Senator Rand Paul. Take a listen to that.
That's right out of Goodfellas. That's right out of a mafioso coming into a bar going, nice bar you have here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
Absolutely inappropriate. Brendan Carr has got no business weighing in on this.
Now, Brendan Carr has said we should, quote, expect a massive shift in the dynamics in the media ecosystem. But, Robert, is there precedent for this kind of action by the FCC? And what really defines free speech in this country?
Let's zero in on what Senator Ted Cruz of Texas had to say. It's notable that this conservative Republican is speaking out in defense of people like Jimmy Kimmel, who have programs on television or might be part of a news organization, to say what they want on the public airwaves. Brendan Carr, the head of the FCC, has argued that anything that's on these major broadcast networks by law should be in the, quote, public interest. And that's how the law and the rules are outlined for broadcasting in this country. But what Senator Ted Cruz is saying is that while there might be a public interest component of any kind of broadcast, he does not believe it's an American value or even a conservative value to have a federal bureaucrat like Brendan Carr, even if he's a powerful one, weighing in on content to this extent. And so there's a real tension, not just in the country, right versus left, but on the right, about how far should government regulators go when it comes to even not just in potentially infringing on speech or curtailing it, but in weighing in on it and on editorially critiquing the content.
Speaking of the First Amendment, I want to talk to you about another issue that's happening. A government memo was sent out to news outlets covering the Pentagon that spells out new rules when it comes to reporting on the U.S. military. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has already booted some news outlets from the media workspaces there, and reporters are now required to sign a pledge not to obtain or use unauthorized material. Many are calling this a serious violation of the First Amendment. What are you hearing from your fellow reporters in Washington and lawmakers about this?
Based on my conversations with different reporters at other news organizations, there is some consternation about having access limited in some way. And there's been a real discussion on this front since the beginning of the Trump administration earlier this year with Secretary Hegseth having a bit of a standoff with the press corps at the Pentagon about how they're going to cover him, how they're going to cover the military. As you can recall, there was the Signal episode where some of these conversations between top officials were leaked out in some capacity, and that was, in the eyes of some of my sources on the right, an embarrassing episode for the administration. So that entire incident hovers over what's happening now, which is there's a real discussion at the highest ranks of the Pentagon about whether the press should be allowed into certain areas and be able to report and have access to certain things. And the press in this country has always wants more access. We want to be able to cover as much as possible. So there is certainly frustration among some in the Pentagon press corps about how this is playing out. But at the end of the day, President Trump, as the commander-in-chief, will have final say, perhaps more than his own Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, as he calls himself after that name change at the Pentagon. Whatever the Secretary has to say will mean a lot with press access, but the President, who is often welcomed reporters to come into the Oval Office, he might have a final say that could differentiate a bit from his own cabinet member.
Robert Costa, thank you so much. Always good to see you.